What's up, everybody? My name's Tom. My artist name's Keota, and I'm happy to be here. I'm just gonna go over this one tune that I feel like has a lot of everything that I'd like to probably cover here. It has like kind of more simple basses. It has a lot of Nero basses. It has some melody things, little atmosphere stuff going on, and it's definitely a fun tune. I like to write things that are kind of experimental, but also like dance floor, like heavy. So let's get right into it. I don't even know where to start. Let's see.
What's up, Blake? What is that? Burberry, what you got on? It smells expensive. It's just deodorant.
Okay. All right, let's see. Where am I? So I bounced this first bass to audio already. It's like right here. But I could probably make that in like 2 seconds because, you know what's funny? I did a tutorial series for Bass Gorilla, and it was actually kind of like the project file that was in that tutorial series, like at the end, was kind of like a very early version of the second drop of this tune. Where is it? Oh, it's solo. Or maybe here. But then I was thinking, like, I don't want to come in too hot. Like, if there's one thing I've been trying to do, it's like sort of simplify things and like not just be like jerking myself off with like crazy sound design and like seriously though, because like as much fun as it is to have like the most ridiculous sound design you could ever possibly like have, if you're also trying to make something like that's like fun on the dance floor, I like kind of forced myself to tone it back. So I just started experimenting with this like simple operator patch. I'm just gonna load it in. I think this tune is in D, so I'm just gonna double click, make a D legato to stretch the note out. I'm gonna hit shift down a couple times, and that just brings it down an octave. So now we got, can I not hear that? There we go. And I think that this patch was like literally, I think that I brought the level up on the second oscillator, and then the chorus is probably 8 or 12, bless you. And I turned this LFO on, which by default is hooked up to destination A. It doesn't really give you that many options. Destination B, you can have this LFO control a lot of things, but destination A can only control the pitch or frequency of oscillators A through D, and it can also control the filter, and then you control how much it controls any of those things. You're blessed. That's the last time. Yeah, and then so I think I just had it controlling the pitch, and I had the rate maybe at like a third, and then the amount down like a good amount. And like right off the bat, that is like pretty much this. But let's see, I think maybe I'm in D sharp. Or I'm in E, I guess. And then, let me see. Yeah, so I have the course 10. And if you're not familiar with exactly what course is, it's literally just multiplying whatever the frequency of the carrier is by that number. And since we're in MIDI and I don't have it set to fixed frequency, it's just multiplying it by 10 of whatever the frequency of E is at. And I had it re-triggered, so it would be like something like this. Let me see. That's like basically the whole thing. I don't think I really did much processing to it either. Oh wait, let's see. That's a little bit more of a scream. So it's at course 12. and I probably maybe put a saturator on it. I might have had an EQ. But I think that, like, clearly this is, like, really simple. Because it is. I mean, like, I hardly did shit to this at all. But I think that's, you kind of have to, like, go to the extremes and do, like, ridiculous things to, like, one day decide, like, okay, maybe it doesn't need to be, like, ridiculous. So, like, that's all that this thing really is. And the whole song, basically... What I would do is just duplicate the operator patch, because then let's see here. Yeah, like there, I just duplicated the operator patch, and then I made this one like a course 10, I think. Oh, and then I would automate the rate and the amount of the LFO that's controlling the pitch. So like here, I think the amount would definitely go up and the rate definitely goes up to like maybe a 24th or something. Yeah. Maybe I don't know if I even had white noise on this. I put, you know, that's like the cool thing to do nowadays, just put fucking white noise on everything. Honestly, I might have had OTT. Let me check it out. When I do, like, at first I like I switched to Ableton a year and a half ago from FL Studio. I was in FL for like 9 years, and when I switched to Ableton, I like tried to not use OTT because I felt like that was like what everyone expects me to do or whatever, like as an Ableton user. But then I had a conversation with Copycat because I was like, I had a hunch that I was like, I feel like you use like bit crushers on your basses because he has these like weird textures. And I usually don't really care for bit crushers, especially in like modern day music. And then he actually was like, no, it's actually just like me abusing OTT a lot, and that like the because it makes OTT can make a lot of artifacts, and it just so happens that when you use a bunch of them in a chain, it can kind of create artifacts that sound similar to, I guess, a bit crusher. Hardly changes the sound too much when I put OTT on, because OTT doesn't really work that well when there isn't like that full of a spectrum to just squash. Like if I maybe low pass this, maybe I'll duplicate it and we'll see 3 times. It creates weird artifacts, and if I had the time down too, it'd also be kind of weird. Yeah, and it almost sounds like white noise. It's weird. Actually, one thing, I'm gonna go off on a little tangent here, but one thing I literally just messed around with is like abusing OTT as much as possible, but kind of using it for like weird sound design stuff. So like basically what I did was I linked the cutoff to a macro of both of the crossovers, and then the amount to another macro, and then I would just duplicate that a few times. Let me turn off this LFO for now, and then maybe I'll just make this one note for the sake of demonstration. Whoops. I was messing with some weird shit, like literally yesterday, during a lesson. I'm just gonna make a new operator, and I'm gonna drag this effect rack over here, and then throw in an operator. Whoops, not instrument rack. So this is just a sine wave going through 3 OTTs. I should probably link the time knob too, so then I just have the control over that as well. One thing I've been doing a lot lately, I'm going to turn off this effect rack for now, and I'll revisit that in a little bit. is just drawing in this waveform editor. So like I'll set it to course 2. I usually like to kind of start there. Course 1 is just like a different texture and it creates different lower harmonics that are closer to the fundamental. So I like to just draw in here and just use my ears. It's kind of arbitrary. Like I'm not really like looking for any particular specific type of like thing. I'm just listening. I know Ableton uses this trick a lot if you guys are familiar with him, and I also know that Frequent does too. He'll just like do a quick fucking thing really quick and then just like start making a sick bass. I like to also do a little detuning, not quite like with the LFO, like what we were doing before, but like on the second oscillator, I'll do like a little bit of fine tuning. I think I have a filter on the group here. I'm just gonna turn it off. I do. So yeah, I was messing around with this OTT thing. And then it just sounds really weird if you just like mess around with the EQ. Actually, I have the project. Let me save this as a new version. So on me final 2. Yeah, I actually had a lot of trouble finding this because I didn't name it like the final, like what it was actually called. I have to go up. OTT fuck shit _2. Is it okay if I curse on this recording?
Yeah.
All right, cool. I mean, is it monetized anyway?
No, it's just on YouTube.
All right, cool. This. So I literally just recorded me moving this around. I also had some other automations. I made a custom notch here. So it's a low and a high, and I'm just controlling the frequency of the low pass and the high pass, and I'm just leaving some space in the middle. Because in auto filter, you can't really control you don't have that much control over like the width of the notch. You have the control of the resonance, but it's gonna always be equal and opposite in both directions. You can't like be like, well, maybe I want to do a little bit of this and stuff. So that's like, I just did it manually. But yeah, so I just like literally recorded on this track below here. Let me move this over. I'm gonna turn down my volume because that's gonna be loud. I know this. So I'll just like hit record here. Oh, whoa, little underruns going on. Sound just totally cut out. Let me, wait. Oh yeah, is my power thing plugged in? Cool, because it performs a lot worse when it's not. Oh yeah, it's because I was recording automation too. I'm just going to be recording audio with this. Yeah, that's not good. So that's basically what I did there. This thing, I did have a little bit of that LFO movement on. I had turned it off here, but that's with it and this is without it. And then I just started messing around and working on a little thing. It's sounding honestly ridiculous right now. But that's just basically me messing around with something that's not Nero, I guess, but trying to also make some like really weird sounds, because I've never made a sound like that. Like, and if you talked to me like a couple years ago, I'd probably be like, ugh, no, because it's like that resonant, like wonky dubstep thing. But honestly, I feel like it sounds really cool. And literally all that is this. I have all these OTTs. There's an EQ, but I don't think it's doing anything. I just had it so I could look at things. I do that a lot. I have a glue compressor at the end, and it's actually just some like preset. And I have a saturator at the very end too. Just a lot of times I put saturators at the end of a chain. I'll just turn on soft clipping just to kind of like catch any peaks that might come through. Just almost in the same way as like a limiter, but I like the characteristics, like the sound of soft clipping a lot more than I like when you start to get gain reduction in Ableton's limiter. Yeah, without the OTTs, it's a little bit different. You're not going to get the... but with the OTTs, it's just like really, really, really dirty, which I kind of like. Like it's just like kind of losing its shit a little. I'm going to go back into this other project. And yeah, the sound cutting out is actually my laptop, I'm realizing now. It has something to do with using my interface and the laptop. I really don't understand what the deal is. I was actually really annoyed. I got this laptop for when I was in Ireland for a bit. All I had in Ireland was my headphones, my sub pack, this laptop, my interface, and I released like 9 tunes out there, and felt like my mix downs with that setup were better than like using my KRKs in my untreated room like at the time, because clearly I couldn't bring my KRKs with me, and at first I was really bummed, but it ended up being like more of a blessing because I learned that that setup is so inexpensive, but like you can get such good results out of it, and like you actually, it encourages you to use your headphones more, because a lot of times I don't like to use, in the past I didn't like to use my headphones before I got a sub pack, because like I wanted to like bump it, and I want to like feel the bass and shit, and like, you know, but like.
Is your sub pack with just the Bluetooth function?
No, I don't. Well, I have the one that goes on the seat.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
That goes like aux in or whatever?
Yeah, it like an aux in, and then I plug my headphones into that. Yeah.
Notice the Bluetooth function in the M2 is like super freaking pristine.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like
It's definitely a really impressive piece of hardware, and I was very skeptical at first of it because I thought it sounded like really gimmicky, but it's as if you're experiencing sub in like a hypothetical vacuum, because you're not going to get any like reverberations or like echoes or mud from your room or anything. Yeah. So let's see what else I got here. I did bounce most of everything to audio in here, but what is this? So this is just another duplicated version of like the same operator patch. I just kept duplicating it, and then I might change like one little thing. I might like turn on a second one of these. Like here, I drew in here. It was a little less arbitrary than I have been lately. Lately, I'd probably just be a little bit... So this second oscillator is at course 1, and I think it's really just meant to add texture. Because then this one is also kind of a weird waveform. And then I also have the routing set up so that the oscillators B and C are in parallel. And this one's at course 4. Oh, I have like a riser thing that I just sort of throw in a lot here and there. That's actually Serum. That's definitely from just doing something like very similar approach to like Frequent's like Serum tutorial, where it's just very open-ended sound design, where I will so like I'll make an E, because like you can make risers in key also, even if they're like really weird. So the whole concept here with what I'm about to do is kind of using Serum as LFO as more of like a step sequencer instead of an LFO. And then I think I should already have some custom, yeah, let's see. Maybe not this one. No, I'm just gonna make a new one. I have the grid set to 16, and I'm just gonna make a lot of arbitrary points here. And then maybe I'll do this a couple times. Like I'll do this maybe one more time just for the sake of saving some time here. But the point's just to get a lot of variety. Maybe I'll have it start up here. And like try and hit all the numbers too. Now I'm gonna save this shape, fac_1. And now I'm gonna just open that same one up again, and I'm just gonna tweak it a good amount. We'll get to it momentarily. It's good to have at least two of these like that are different, just for the sake of variety. So when I got these two things, I'm gonna trigger them. I'm gonna bring the rate down to like 4 bars. Maybe even 8, and then I'm gonna make a knob, time knob. I'm gonna link it to this one. I'm actually just gonna bring the rate down all the way, and then I'm gonna link this up here. I'm also gonna make sure that the amount that the macro is controlling it is a little bit different on both. I don't want it to be the same because I don't really want it to. I don't want it to repeat itself too quickly. And now I'm just gonna start doing some random things. I'm not really giving it much thought. Let's see. I'll put this maybe on the wavetable position, and I'll pick something like, I'll do FM from B maybe. And then I'll turn this on to like band plus or minus. And now I'm kind of randomly assigning LFO 1 to certain places and LFO 2 to other places, and it would honestly probably be better if I had a third one as well. I'm going to turn on this multiband, and then maybe like a flanger or something. I'll just hook it up to the depth, and I'm going to turn the rate all the way down. Oh, the note ended. Consolidate these, drag this out. I'll throw like a saturator just to catch any peaks. see if I have a... No, I have a different project file where I did this exact thing, and I already had like some cool results, but basically just like... If I bring up the time knob, that's where it starts to get into the territory of that one frequent tutorial. So instead of going over risers, because that's not as fun as basses, I'm gonna just sort of switch gears here. What's this? Oh yeah, so this is a Serum patch. I'm going to put all these effects in a group and see how it sounds with those off. Doesn't sound much different. Now this wavetable, I think, was a custom one. Let me turn down this rate a lot. I'm gonna duplicate this real quick because I want to actually hear how this wavetable sounds like with nothing else going on. And I'm gonna, yeah. So I think that basically I probably just like distorted a sine wave with like an operator at like course 2, and then I dragged it into Serum. Or I made a wavetable internally within Serum, which I'll just maybe go over that too. Let's see. Whoops. I'm gonna make an E, hit legato. I'm gonna bring it down a few octaves. Open up a Serum. I'm going to make this basic shapes. I'm going to bring this random knob down. If you don't know what the random knob in Serum does, it's basically like a retrigger. If you have the random knob all the way down, then that waveform will always start at the same point in its phase. If you have the random knob up, then it'll start in a different point in its phase, just like randomly. So like one might think like, oh, then why the fuck would I ever have this up? That's for things like unison. If I were to have like a square and like, or a saw wave, and so with the random knob all the way down, they're all going to start at the same point in their phases and then detune in equal and opposite directions, each one of the voices. It's always going to sound the same way, but if you have the random knob all the way up, you get that more like fuzzy, hairy sound. I'm going to need to make this longer as well. Wait, let me turn off loop. So what I think that I made that bass, the way I made it, I think, is I had a sine wave. And then I had another sine wave, probably. Bring the level down on it because I'm just going to do FM from B. Now I'm going to bring the oscillator B's octave to 2. That's similar like an operator if you're going to modulate the carrier or oscillator A with oscillator B at course 2, because course 2 being twice the frequency, that's also what an octave is. So a 1 octave up on the oscillator B, and I'm doing FM from B here. Oscillator 1 up is kind of just the same as course 2 and operator on the second oscillator. And then a little bit of fine tuning. And now I'm gonna go into distortion. Maybe I'll just... And I'm going to make a high pass filter, and I'm only gonna have it affecting the noise. Whoops. I'm gonna do like an analog, like white noise. And I'm gonna leave the level down a lot because I'm just gonna throw this compressor on it, which even if you have the level at like 1%, it really brings it out a lot. Maybe a little EQ. And now here's the cool thing with Serum. You can do this thing called resample to oscillator A, which basically just can turn, it takes the output of Serum and turns it into a wavetable internally, and then, so I'm gonna try that out. But it is important to note that I don't know like the snapshot of time that it takes from the output of Serum to make this wavetable, but I know that it's a really long time, like maybe a bar or 2 bars. And I don't know if that's tempo synced or whatever, but I know this because if you have like, if I had a lot of fine tuning here, then that over the course of like a bar or 2 bars turned into a wavetable is just way too much movement. And just like each wavetable is comprised of a maximum of 256 frames. So if you just think about the amount of movement that would be there over the course of 1 or 2 bars, it's just like too much for a wavetable. So I just try and bring this fine tuning down like a lot, maybe like, and maybe I'll throw in a filter too, just to make the wavetable a little bit more interesting. And then same goes for if you're gonna have any LFOs, I would make them really slow. So I'll do it over the course of 2 bars. And I like to do this a lot in Serum. Instead of like having a really small range and then doing things, I like to do the maximum range and then use this like, sort of, if you think about it vertically, I'm like right here would probably be in the low mids, and then up here would probably be like at 1,000 hertz and so on and so forth. Like I have just the maximum like range of possibilities. I'd probably be better off just making this simple, because I don't know how, like I said, I don't know the window of time that Serum decides to use. So now I'll duplicate this again. I'm duplicating it because you can't control Z in Serum because Steve Duda hates us all. Now I'm gonna hit menu and then resample to oscillator A. And now it made this wavetable here. So that might be too much movement. I can tell just by looking at it. It looks like some type of a valley. But also one thing to be mindful of when you resample to oscillator A is that it keeps all the effects on and everything. So a way to like demo and see how similar the wavetable sounds to the sound that you originally made is to just make an LFO and then put it on the wavetable position and just make it like a really slow rate, like 2 or 4 bars. When I still have the white noise on. So if I'll increase that rate, I think that sounds pretty good. Oh, but that's one thing to be mindful of too. How the pitch changes when it goes backwards. That's, I guess, Serum is just doing its best guess at turning this into a functional wavetable. But basically, if you're going to be making a wavetable in Serum, the waveform shouldn't appear to move right or left. It should just appear to oscillate. And that's what's happening here. It looks like it's kind of moving left or right. That's why there's a change in pitch. So you can actually edit it. And I think if you press nudge all phases to fundamental, it can kind of fix that a little. Oops. Still not quite perfect, so you can maybe try to do that again. And then I'm also going to normalize this so that it's kind of more rounded in overall loudness. What you could also do at this point is just use the only part of the wavetable that's not going to do that. Let me see, actually. It's definitely a little too detuned, and it's actually really annoying. I'll just nudge it again and see if that works. I doubt that it will. Nudge it twice. It still appears to move left and right. So making a wavetable in Serum can clearly be like really finicky, and it's just a lot of trial and error. That's why I've duplicated these so I can go back and like make a change if I really need to. Let's see. So like maybe something I might do differently, maybe I'll turn the FM down a little. Now I'm back in the version before I turned it into a wavetable here. Maybe I could make this rate a little bit slower, or on the fine tuning, I'll just detune it a little bit less. And then here on this notch, I'll make it like 4 bars instead of 2. I'll duplicate this again, and I'll try and make that into a wavetable again and see if I have any better luck. Let's see, resample the oscillator A, and that looks a little bit more usable, because like, yeah, that looks, it is moving to the left, which again, we definitely don't want. I'll nudge that again and see if that fixes it. Sometimes it fixes it better than others, and I'll normalize these two. And then turn off all of these so that we can demo it and see if it sounds like the original did. Put this wavetable here, this LFO here, I mean. Yeah, see now it's not moving left and right as much. It does this little, it like jumps a little, you can see, at the beginning, and then at the end it does. So actually you can go in here and you can see where that is. Let's see, can I use my arrow keys? Nope. So maybe, yeah, it was jumping around here. It like skips a few frames. So what I'd want to do is maybe here you can add or remove. So I can do this beginning to selected. I can remove that. And now find that same bit at the end that jumped around in like a unpredictable way. Yeah, like maybe here I'll remove selected to the end, and then I will crossfade these, and now let me check it out. It's a lot more usable. And this can get really cool in terms of like going down this rabbit hole, because you can do this over and over again. And you can almost think about wavetables as putting like a piece of audio into sampler. Because it's basically just sampling a waveform. Maybe I'll turn this like BPM off. Maybe throw some, I'll turn these effects back on. And now I can like FM this again. And that's where things can get kind of cool. And basically with that Serum patch, the original one, where is it? Is it this? What is this? This one, I think the rate was just higher here. What I did was I just took the wavetable, which one am I on? I mean, this one, is this it? And turn on some detuning, and then had that random knob all the way down. It's not going to sound the same because the wavetable isn't the same, but that's like if I were to turn off that unison on this Serum, the original one. It doesn't have that phasing with these 6 voices. And if I had the random knob all the way up, it would just be kind of a little messier. And then I just, that LFO movement is just from, I think like a band, the band pass is off. It's from a notch here, or a little dip. And then this little band pass, and I have the dry wet down a bit on this distortion. If I turn that off. So if I actually don't have the distortion on with this filter, which is a band pass with the mix down a little bit, and if I don't have this EQ on, and I don't have the multiple voices, it'll just sound really static. But that, yeah, made a custom wavetable. Again, it's a lot of like making your own wavetable, especially within Serum. It can be like very trial and error. And I'm sure that there's like a forum, or maybe even in the fucking manual of Serum, it probably says like exactly how resample the oscillator A works. And like whatever that snapshot of time that it uses to take the output of Serum and then turn that into a wavetable. Like I currently don't know what that is, so I just sort of mess around with it. But you could definitely get some sick sounds just from... Maybe I'll do amplitude modulation instead. One thing I like to do, like I did before, is just have this distortion on, but then I'll bring the dry wet back, and then I'll use this band pass. Maybe I could add some movement there. And again, I'm going to do the same thing I did with the notch filter before. I'm going to bring this all the way down, but then I'm just going to make it so that this LFO is controlling it like the maximum amount, and then I'm going to use this kind of more like a stepper than an LFO. Maybe I'll use this EQ's peaks as well. I'll make like another LFO. I'll drag it onto the frequency of this peak, bring it all the way down like I was before, and then maybe I'll make this notchish. And now if you're feeling crazy, you could resample this to oscillator A again, and so on and so forth. And that just gets like absolutely ridiculous after a certain point. So yeah, that's what this bass is, definitely. And then what else do we got? I think this is like more of a stabby hit. Ah, this is also, yeah, so let me check it out. Let me mute all of those serums I had. So let's see what this one is. I think this is the same idea, where it's just a custom wavetable. I have a little amplitude modulation from B. This noise is getting sent through a high pass. Because white noise, or any noise, is just, if you have it in the low end, it's just gonna muddy that shit up a lot. There's definitely some, oh yeah, I learned a new trick recently. I'm gonna open up alrighty. This fucker. I think this is a lot of operator basses in this one I'm opening up right now. Pretty sure it's all operator. Check it out. Oh, sick, my auto cut out. Alright, there's no sound coming out of this one oscillator for some reason, or track. Is it Serum again? This, oh, preset was made with a newer version of Serum. How long will that take to update? That's tight, love that. Let's see, it'll either be really slow or really fast. And also I thought that this was operator basses, but it's not. Okay, well I'm not gonna go over that trick. I'm just gonna open up a new project file and I'm gonna just like go over this trick with operator. It doesn't matter what the synth is. Basically putting Corpus on basses, which is new to me. But it's like kind of like that Brick Squash, Ultra Sloth, Kill Smith sort of sound. That you can get out of it. I'm going to make this legato octave down, and then Gonna bring up the level on oscillator 2. Bring it up to course 2. I'm gonna just throw on an EQ and a saturator. Little detuning. Maybe make it a little bit more interesting. I'll do 2 oscillators in parallel, so I'll use oscillator D as well. Maybe for like a little texture. And I got the fine tuning at, like this one's at 6 on oscillator D, and on B it's at 15. The higher the course is, the faster the detuning is going to be. So like the more of a difference it's going to make in like adjusting the fine tuning knob. So instead of using erosion, I've been experimenting with using a vocoder and putting it, bringing the dry wet down and then having it set to noise, and then like just use a couple bands. But then at that point you have to play with the range and just bring like the bottom range up and then play with the formant. But what I like to do instead of playing with the dry wet is I just kind of do that custom. So like I'll just name this white noise, and I'll name the rack white noise. And then I'm going to just make a new chain. I'm going to bring this up at 100% wet, and then this chain I'm going to name dry. And then I'm going to put an EQ after this vocoder and then high pass it. And then also you're going to want to bring the release time down. And then maybe I'll just do a little shelf here. I could play with the rate of that detuning as well. I'll link this fine tuning to both of the fine tunings to the same macro, but then pretty much like above like 80 on the fine tuning, it's going to start to be like not perceived as much as movement as it will just become this like dissonant tone. So I'm just going to set the maximum value to 80 on one of them. And then I'll do like maybe like 70 on the other, just so that they're not identical. That still might be a little too much white noise for my taste. I'll bring up the scale on this EQ, which just kind of makes it affect it more. But now this is the cool part. So I'm going to bring in a Corpus. I'm going to put a saturator after it, but just set its default settings, just so I can catch those peaks with the soft clipping. So now right off the bat it's going to sound like shit. So I'm going to bring this decay time down, most importantly. And I bring the ratio down all the way, and then I usually have the inharmonics somewhere between 0 and negative 100%. And now at this point, it's a matter of messing with the fine tuning, and then I'm going to leave the dry wet at 50 right now, even though it's way more than what I would normally use, just for the sake of example, so you can hear the effect of the Corpus, but then I'm going to turn it back down. I'm going to put this in a rack, and then I'm going to map this to macro 1, the fine tuning. So this sound that I'm thinking of in particular is like, it's in the low mids. It can really help like bring out lower harmonics that you have and a bass. So in that range is really like somewhere between like 1 and 300. So I'm going to make like the minimum value like 120. And the maximum, I'll do it like 330. I usually like to go like maybe a little bit outside of the range of what I might normally use, because sometimes I end up finding some cool shit like a little bit outside of that range. So now I'm gonna bring down this, play with this hit. Bring down the dry wet. And then just automate this. I'm gonna turn off the grid for that also. Okay. I'm going to bring up the dry wet so you can actually hear it. also do is automate that fine-tuning macro that I made too. Yeah, it has something to do with my USB and this interface. I have no idea what it is, but like I'll see the interface light flicker. That's whenever it cuts out. I don't know why. But I usually produce on my desktop at home. So now I'll bring down that dry wet to a more like realistic position. The decay time can also make a huge difference. If like the longer the longer the decay time, I mean it just kind of like reverberates into like the next part. Also, I should mention the spread makes a huge difference too. Not just because it's making it wider, but also because for whatever reason, when the signal is stereo, the way that distortion or saturation is going to affect it, it's going to be totally different. One thing I like to do a lot too, before something with soft clipping or before some like careful compressing or limiting, is just make a little high shelf to brighten things up. I'll either do that or an OTT, not both. Because if I'm just talking about brightening something up and exciting it a little, I'll bring down the amount. That's with the OTT, and this is with the EQ. So now what I might do is I'll freeze this. And I don't actually remember what note that was, but I'll find out in a second. Now I'm going to turn the grid back on, and I'm going to make a sampler. It's definitely something I like to do a lot. Make a note. I think it's an E. And then I got to make the root note the same here as well. E0. Now by default, sampler's got this filter on, and it also has the volume at negative 12 decibels. Now one way to tell if this is in key is if I turn on this oscillator here with FM, and then I just start to bring the volume up. If it sounds okay, then we're in the clear, but if it doesn't, then it's like not the right note, and it'll sound like absolute shit. Yeah, that sounds good. So that's with course 1 with FM. It's frequency modulating this audio with a sine wave in this example. I like to usually use sine waves or sort of smooth waveforms, nothing that has like much like high-end stuff going on. And then maybe I'll try it with a course 2. This is a course 2. This other one's course 1. The difference in the harmonics that it makes is very clear, but course 1 makes like lower harmonic in this area. And course 2 is gonna, it already does have a little bit of those lower harmonics, I guess, here, because probably from me drawing in the wavetable like this. Oh yeah, because this one is at course 1. So I'm gonna have those low, like super lower harmonics. I usually kind of like to wait and to introduce those lower harmonics until later, because that's when you can really start muddying up the sound a lot quicker. Because all mud is just too many lower harmonics. There's this thing in music theory called the lower harmonic interval, and basically what that is, it's a threshold farther down the piano roll or farther down the frequency spectrum, kind of in the low, mids, and below, at which harmony no longer sounds pleasing and melodic, and instead it sounds sort of dissonant and almost rhythmic instead. And you know, long story short, it usually doesn't really sound good, but that's what mud is. You could have the muddiest piece of shit bass on earth, and you can still save it just by removing those harmonics. Like, let me see. Like, that's overly distorted, but then that's a pretty clean sub right there. So it's these harmonics in this area that generate mud. There's just too many, and they're too close together, and they're too resonant. One thing that you'll hear a lot of artists do, I mean, it's been done for a while. Cone Sound probably was like one of the first people to like really make it like this signature sort of sound, is this like pitch, like revving sound. I'm gonna turn on the saturator, but I'm gonna just have it sort of kind of gentle. I'm gonna do a little bit of a crossfade here, just a tiny bit. Enough so that it's not clipping, and then I'm going to bring up this attack time on this pitch envelope. You know, I'm gonna Control F Nero and just bring in a different bass. Because this one isn't really that good for this particular type of thing. I think the root note here is probably F. Oh, and I like to loop this at like maybe 1.5 seconds. Let me maybe do a different one. You know what? Because I don't get this issue when I just plug it direct in. But then I just have to change which drivers I'm using really quick. Maybe I'll do a little erosion. Two artists you can hear abuse the fuck out of this because they probably just learned it recently is Vector and Black Carl. And I've talked to them about this so much too because like they use this a lot and because it sounds cool and depending on like what you throw in it, but like it all depends on like the material that you're putting into sampler. Let's check it out. Wait a second. I think this is probably a D. Oh no, it's an F. It says F on it. F. So one thing I like to do, because you can't automate the position of this loop thing, which is actually a huge pain in the ass, I think that you can kind of have some workaround where you like, you can link this like aux thing to it and play with like the peak or the sustain or something, but it needs to be re-triggered with the MIDI each time. So what I like to do is just make an audio track beneath and then do the input as the one I want to record. And then I'll literally just record me moving around. Yeah, you can get some really sick shit. I think that source audio that I was using in Sampler, I had already done something like that. Oh, turn that warp off. You can hear that shit. Oh, I didn't do that, no. That wasn't from Sampler. That was just literally from me changing the pitch over time. I usually, if I'm gonna change the pitch of something and then bounce it out so that I have this like 1 minute long sample that's at one note. If I do any pitch changes, I always return to the root, and I always usually go up or down like an octave, or in between an octave, or like in between of an octave, and so on and so forth, just so that I know that like where my tonal center is at all times, and then I label it with the key so that I just know what I'm working with. And I think, because that's like a huge thing I think with a lot of like producers when like they're starting out, is you can get a lot of fucking cool variety and a lot of really cool sounds from having a bass that has a lot of pitch modulation. But then at the end of the day, when it comes time to like using it and then writing music, it can be really, really difficult to like find a tonal center and then like generate hooks that last longer than like 8 or 16 bars and like write a song that can kind of come full circle. It's much easier to do that if you like actually know what key it's in and like what you're working with and all that stuff. This one I'm pretty sure was made, I have a video or a tutorial about Serum, something with Serum FX and like Nero basses. So like I wouldn't necessarily go into how to make this here because I've already it's already on the internet. But does anyone have any like questions or anything? Or like anything that you want to see before we wrap this up?
I have a question about how you, like, I know it's completely unrelated right now, but I'm curious as to like how you put your beats together, how you're putting together like your, more specifically, your hats, how you're making kind of like that like slow, really like swingy vibe, and also like if you have any tips on how to like make your kicks and your snares kind of sound so snappy and slappy.
So to answer the first question, wait, maybe I'll save this as like a bass design. Bass design, what's today's date? 7/17. To answer your first question, I almost always use like authentic break loop samples for like the body of my drums. I always use my own kicks and my own snares, unless I am really going for like a more authentic sound, then I'll just like sample a snare. So for a lot of like sort of swingy vibes, what I'll do is like I'll bring in like a break. And then instead of going into beats mode and then like snapping everything besides the kick and the snare to the grid, what I'll do is I'll place my kicks and my snares where the kicks and the snares and the break samples are. And even if it's like, a lot of times I'll use like a combination of multiple like layers of break samples. Like if like, let's just say I only really like this much of this break sample, but then over here is stuff I'm not really going to use. I'll usually have like a few different layers of like different break samples, and I'll just kind of like use like the complementary parts of each one. Like I'll just use the best parts of each break sample. But usually I kind of find the groove based off of like one sample, like one break loop, and then I place my kicks and my snares wherever they fall in that drummer's actual groove. So I'm not really thinking too hard about it. I just kind of like go with the strongest break sample that I have, and then with the other break samples, then I'll tweak those so that they fit with the rhythm of the main one. As far as kicks and snares go, I would just highly recommend using Smexoscope. If I were to Command F snare, like this one maybe? Be nice if, yeah, this is a good example. I'm going to just put an EQ and a glue compressor. That's like literally all I ever usually use. And then a Smexoscope, which is free. So I use Smexoscope to just like, if I don't trust my ears, and I almost always don't trust my ears when it comes to compression, especially with like kicks and snares. What you really want from a snare or a kick is a waveform that sort of looks like this. This is like a not a bad example of something that looks good. You want the transient to be the loudest point. It's okay if it plateaus for a little, but then from there it should only go down in volume. With a lot of like shitty samples, you'll find like there'll be like just really weird fluctuations in volume where like there'll be like a little like it'll be loudest at first in the beginning, but then it'll be like loud again. Usually that's just from like getting a sample pack of somebody who doesn't know how to fucking use a compressor. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to bring this threshold down all the way. For snares, I like to use an attack time of like 3 to 30 milliseconds, and I like to use glue compressor because it mimics an analog compressor, and analog compressors don't give you that many options on each parameter. Like on the attack knob and on the release knob, there's 7 different like points that you could turn that knob to and nothing more. So it kind of forces you to just make a decision and move on to like your creative process, and you're not like going and making little tweaks in like the umpteenth thousandth of a millisecond, because like nobody's going to give a single shit about that at all. So here, I brought the threshold down all the way. I haven't touched anything. The makeups, I haven't moved the makeup gain. I haven't touched the range or anything. What you're seeing now is 3 milliseconds of the uncompressed signal coming through. So now what I'll do is I'll bring the threshold to like maybe a more reasonable point. I usually have it kind of around like 9 o'clock. And then bring up the makeup and bring down the range a little bit. At this point, it's just a matter of sculpting this sound so that you get like some nice transient pop, but then you also have a nice, like some nice body. And what I'm looking for is a shape or a waveform that looks like that. And I don't think that I really trusted myself with like making a snare or a kick punchy until I started to use Smexoscope and I could actually see it. Because you could take the most squashed piece of shit sound, like, yeah, that's a good example. And then I'm going to just sculpt this again. I'll bring the makeup all the way down, the threshold all the way down. You can kind of reintroduce dynamics with the compressor. At least a little. Like, there's only so much you can really do to like help a piece of shit sound. But it's at least snapping a little. It doesn't have dynamics in the body, but at least in the beginning, you can hear that little transient. And I do the same thing for kick, so like Control F kick. Oh, so here's probably an example of a kick I don't like. So that just kind of looks a little weird. Let's see. Oh. Like this. First of all, the transient is not the loudest part, which is weird. So yeah, you could probably sculpt this. With kicks, I like to use like 0.01 to 0.3 milliseconds. And I'm just gonna be totally real. I'm totally ripping off like all this that I know about making things punchy is from Culprit on its Twitch stream. It's like $5 or $6 a month or whatever. But then you have like a catalog of like all the Twitch streams he's ever done. So I'm gonna have the makeup all the way down, the range all the way down. Why is that still? Why is this still loud? Hold on. There we go. So now it's really hard to tell. Maybe if I had it at like 3 milliseconds, but you could see that 3 milliseconds of the uncompressed signal coming through. On 0.01, the shutter speed or whatever you want to call it of Smexoscope isn't fast enough to really see that 0.01 millisecond coming through. But then I'm going to just bring the threshold to like 9 o'clock, turn on soft clipping, bring up the makeup, bring down the range a little. Might be a little hard to sculpt this one because it does have a really weird shape. When in doubt, you could always just do this. And now I think sculpting it'll be a little bit more realistic. But yeah, honestly, I feel like I wouldn't know how to compress for shit if I didn't use Smexoscope. It's like my number one thing. And on my kicks and snares, the only things I use is an EQ, and I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't even really touch the EQ at all because, like, I think that didn't really need to. An EQ, a glue compressor, and a Smexoscope. That's all I ever use on my kicks and my snares. I don't go crazy with it. And then that and like layering and stuff. So like in my sample pack, I have like kick samples, which are just like the body. And then I have kick tops. And then I have kicks that have the tops on them. And those are all synthesized. Definitely gonna make like a YouTube video specifically about that. And the same thing with my snares. I have a bunch of snare tops, which are all just like white noise with just like slightly different processing on each one. And then the fundamentals. So besides the EQ and compressing part, it's a matter of just like getting a fundamental that you want and a top that you want. Sometimes multiple tops. On the tops, I would definitely high pass them, even though they probably, like I've already probably high passed them for the sample pack. But there's a little something there. I'm just gonna hold command and drag this so it duplicates it over here. And then this snare, oh yeah, I'm gonna take these effects off and I'm gonna group all of these. The effects that I have here, I'm gonna delete the saturator, but then I'm going to move these to the group. Now I'm actually gonna use the EQ because this is a snare that hasn't been made yet. This fundamental lasts way too long, but I'd rather, if I'm gonna be synthesizing just fundamentals, I'd rather them be too long because you can always shorten them up. And then like, you can just find little sweet spots in the white noise to like sort of bring out like whatever type of character that you're looking for. Almost similar to like how with like a bass, if you make different like peaks or dips in the EQ spectrum, it'll cater towards like certain vowels better. That's like kind of how formants work too. Just like certain parts in the frequency spectrum will sound more like a E, A, U, I sort of thing. I kind of think about that with like the white noise on the tops of snares a little bit. Some snares will sound more like a k, and some will be more like a psh. You know what I mean? It's like really subtle, but at the end of the day, it is just like really subtle differences in like the EQ. And then here, this is where I like to use the, so I'm gonna do the takt time at 3 milliseconds. I'll probably just keep this where it is. Look at it here. Definitely plateauing for a little too long. It's like a little too squashed. Like here, I might just make a little boost at the fundamental. Because hitting that soft clipping, it just can kind of sound good. And then what I like to look for with like a snare is like a well-rounded spectrum. I like for it to look really flat. And then sometimes I'll like make a cut like this. Whoops. Like this. Like if I want a really tight snare, maybe and then make a track below it, input from 3 group, I have a snare. And I could go more into detail. And actually, I went into a decent amount of detail about this kind of process on my YouTube. I have a video that's about building snares and stuff like that. But then, even though I've already EQ'd and compressed these snares and done all this stuff, like in my sample pack, I've done that process like 64 times or however many snares are in there. I almost always will do an EQ compressor and a Smexoscope when I drag this snare into a song, because just in the context of a tune, it's always going to be a little bit different. And one thing I like to do once in a while too, frequency shifter. You can kind of like just move the fundamental of the snare without really changing like the overall characteristics of like the top. It sounds a lot different than if you were to just pitch this bad boy up. Although that sounds cool too. Yeah, does anyone else have any other questions about anything? All right, I think that wraps it up then. Yeah, I went a little over, but I'd rather go over than under.
Give it up for Keota, guys.
Thank you.